Well, I know a lot of people at NASA, and most of them are really very upset right now. I'm not going to quote anybody. And everybody, you know, when your own opposite score, you get upset. My thought is, I do not know whether, you know, this ideal, okay, of let's give it to the commercial space operation folks, is that truly grounded in realistic science and engineering, or is it grounded in science fiction? If it's grounded in science fiction, very likely it's not going to work. So we don't know. But that would be my singular example to that particular.
I'm not sure what you mean grounded in science fiction, like switching the base of the...
It's harder than to do real space operations. It's harder than it looks in science fiction.
And I think part of the idea is a lot of science fiction portrays companies who have, it's like the company from Alien or Jupiter Mining Corporation, all these kind of things. And whether people watch the movie and they're like, oh, well, in the movies, there's all these companies that have their own spaceflight.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't comment so much on... But NASA, a lot of time and a lot of rockets blowing up for NASA to gain the collective experience and wisdom that it has now. And, you know, can a smaller commercial company come up with the right engineering, the right safety protocols, the durable hardware, everything it takes, can they do it? The reason I worry is that science, well, of course, science fiction makes it look easy because you don't want to spend, well, real life already had it being a tremendous story of getting humans up into orbit. Science fiction can hardly duplicate that. So we're off to greener pastures elsewhere. But it was a terrific technical challenge. Science fiction can make it look easy. So that's what I'm saying. I mean, like my friends at NASA, I hope this works. Spaceship One is just such a... They got up to orbit, and in the great tradition of the space program, well, they got up, suborbitals. They got up to the top, and flung a bunch of M&Ms up into the air. And you see, the video, M&Ms barely floating in the air. And then this thing comes down, and it's a glider all the way down. And they had to get commercial glider pilot licenses before the FAA was happy with them. This thing comes down dead steady. And they made scale composites in spaceship. And just how Mike Bell and his colleagues, they made it. It's just...
One of the things I study is nanotechnology and nanotech novels. And the NSF is currently funding a nanotechnology undergraduate education grant. They started this 3 years ago. And this year, the entire thing is the ethics of nanotechnology, all of the grant proposals. And they've got $12 million, I think they're funding through this. This is for undergraduate education in the ethics of nanotechnology. Now, why is that even necessary? Well, it's because you ask anyone about what nanotechnology is, and not you, anyone else, right? What nanotechnology is, and they're not going to talk about the Richard Smalley nanotechnology. They're not going to talk about nanotubes, buckyballs, anything like that. They're going to talk about what in the science fiction realm is gray goo.
The gray goo.
Yeah, nanotechnology is a bunch of self-assembling molecular manufacturing robots that can eventually take over. What Richard Smalley called again and again science fiction, he actually used that term to talk about it all the time. Big debate between Drexler and Smalley. So that's the reason, though. It's that the science fiction aspects eventually became such a part of the culture that, as you said, it can drive. That was your comment under your breath, that it can drive policy and In this particular instance, it is as well.
Yeah.
An example. Now, I don't know if it's for the better, which was your point.
Yeah.
That was your point, Randy. So you said it can, but you didn't know if it was a good thing. But it is interesting that what we have here is the science and the ethical implications of it being developed at the same time. They're not willing to do the science and then talk about the ethical implications. They realize that these two need to come together.
You touched on it a little bit, but that sort of goes along with something I was going to ask earlier. I know as hard science fiction writers, I kind of know what you're going to say, but I'm curious, do you think that's irresponsible of science fiction writers to portray a certain field of science in a light that is not realistic at all, and your average reader, I mean, there are tons of science fiction readers who obviously are not scientists, and even some who are, who don't understand a certain field, and see this science portrayed a certain way, and they're like, oh, that's how it is, you know, and some people think that, and do you think that's responsible, or do you think that it's stupid on the part of the reader to actually buy into it wholesale? Because I mean, there's some personal responsibility from the reader's point of view, right? But then do you think it's also the author's responsibility to, I'm not saying there should be a warning at the beginning. Disclaimer, this is not
Science
real.
in this novel is not as accurate as it could be.
I would pinpoint the problem as science education in this country is sorely lacking. Then I would say that writers are not to blame if their work falls on, uneducated minds and is taken as being a lot more factual than it is. But then I would say science fiction writers, should definitely be all for science education and do whatever they can in their local community to advocate good, solid science education in all the sciences.
And there's a chicken and egg problem that's come to mind, because as a commercial enterprise, the editors have a perspective on what their audience is. And if their audience doesn't care about scientific rigor, if they don't know
It could be boring.
good science and bad science, then if they just want gosh wow adventures and things blowing up or whatever it might be, then the editors are going to look for writers who can produce those kind of stories. So there is that commercial reality. There is certainly room for more sophisticated stories about how science is done, how technologies work, and there are writers who have successful careers doing that. Gregory Benford comes to mind. He's a physicist at UC Irvine who has written lots of stories about how science is done, and with all the realism, the nitty-gritty of kowtowing to the grant committees and all that sort of the reality that nobody wants to admit.
Sci-fi story about grant proposals.
Well,
I read it, it was fantastic.